Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back once again to the Horus Heresy lore breakdown. We are still, of course, on the Vengeful Spirit, though the mission to actually try and cripple the damn thing has not yet gotten off the ground. Though Loken's brave boys are in the final stage of preparation. Said Despander is about to be thrown in the work that will have Loken almost beat Yaktan crews to death. Rightio. Some spicy waters ahead, I see, as Loken is brought to a massive orbital prison fortress above Titan. A future base too, it sounds like then. But for right now, it is simply a vast, incredibly well-hidden, and unfathomably well-armed prison yard. And I'm going to try the thing about finishing one part of the story before moving on the next one this time, though it runs the risk of me forgetting about random stuff because, good God, it jumps again. Just as Loken reaches a darkened cell and finds Mercedes Ollerton inside of it, next storyline. Heavens. Anywho, Mercedes informs Loken that she did indeed get off the Vengeful Spirit, and Euphrates Keeler and Kirill Sinderman did so as well. They were all rescued by Yaktan crews, and they had travelled to Terra aboard the Eisenstein, before being relocated to their current charming abode by the Emperor's watchdogs. She talks to Loken about what she's experienced since her flight. She talks about the Saint, as she's now called, and Loken apparently has heard nothing of this. Well done. It's all everyone can seem to talk about these days, apparently. But there has been some interesting things. You see, Mercedes says that she hasn't heard anything from Euphrates Keeler, and yet she talks to Loken as if she's spoken to her. She gives Loken a box, which she's been allowed to keep, somehow, I guess, that she's supposed to pass on to Loken because Euphrates said that he needs to have it. Putting aside the questions of how this box is even possible in a top security prison, Loken asks the less obvious question. You said you hadn't talked to Euphrates. How can you know these things? And she simply says that she's been seeing her in her dreams. Well, considering Loken sees a ghost at the edge of his vision pretty much every moment of the waking day, that doesn't sound too crazy to him, frankly. And this, then, is what gets Loken in such a sour mood. Yaktan has been lying to him, or at the very least not telling him the truth. Though in part it's not really that he's mad at Yaktan, he understands, probably deep down, that the man had orders, but Loken has been quite on edge for a very long time now. Going crazy on a planet, being left for dead, having to be brought back as a half-maddened savage beast, and then starting to see the ghost of your friend everywhere. Yes, Loken's psyche is a little bit on the fraying end at this point, really. And that is why he beats Yaktan halfway to death. But he is, fortunately, stopped by the other members of his little forlorn hope, as he asks Yaktan how long he's known. It's been years, he says. Why didn't you tell me? It's because I ordered him to, says Rogal Dorn, whom we know from another little short story has had some other business to take care of on this little prison rock. He has killed a very, very good friend of his and somebody that he deeply respected. That is also why, of course, none of the people who have been captured with any kind of connection to the Saint or time aboard the Vengeful Spirit can be allowed to walk free. And I see the point in that. I really do. They've spent a lot of time alongside the War Master. The Emperor Malkidor knows what has taken over the War Master, and they know how that tends to corrupt the ever-living lol out of people. Yet, nevertheless, you could have at least given them, like, an apartment or something. Not on Terra, but, you know, make a prison, make a little bit of a fluffy cell, give them something to write with, a sitting place, something. Burn everything they produce, obviously, but, you know, make it a little cozy. Why a prison cell? And not to mention as well, a prison cell that specifically goes out of its way to be as inhospitable as possible. Just seems a little needlessly cruel, and seems as if it's designed more to make us go like, oh, that meanie old emperor, rather than any actual, you know, necessities of security, but oh well, details. Let's get back to why Rogal suddenly appeared. He has himself a little bit of a pep talk with Loken's forlorn hope and informs them that this is a ploy concocted by Malkador and Russ, and if they carry it out well, then they will earn his respect and possibly even trust, and Malkador will receive a portion of that as well. Once more, we see that there's a fair bit of division within the Loyalist ranks as well, though it pales in comparison to the division amongst the Chaos ranks. I mean, Fulgrim did try to eat Petarabo. The Loyalists haven't gone quite that far yet, so they still have a little bit of catching up to do. Beyond that, Loken asks Dorn if he knows where Euphrates and Cinderman are, and he says, quite honestly, that he doesn't know where they are. Apparently they're traveling all over Terra and the orbital rings, preaching and talking to people everywhere, or at the very least, the rumors seems to suggest that that is what they are doing. Whilst Rogal Dorn has a ton of people out looking for her, she is being hidden by her devotees. Fascinating how quickly she built a following, isn't it? I know that it's been hinted at several times that Lorgar's little book has quite a few secret followers, but at the heart of the Imperium, she finds enough devout believers to keep her hidden from the Custodes, the Imperial Fists, and all local law enforcement. Damn, she's good. I can't lie, she's very good. Meanwhile, back on Moloch, Raven is discovering that it's not all fun and games being the master of an Imperial world, as he is stuck in an incredibly tedious and long-winded meeting. There is also a mention here that he is carrying a scepter that was supposedly carried by the Stormlord. That's something we haven't mentioned upon just yet. The Stormlord, apparently, is some kind of mythical figure that had said to have visited Moloch many moons ago, thousands of years, etc., and had left the planet in a beam of light. Alright. I think we can be pretty sure who this Stormlord is. There is also a mention of a shattered tower, which one of our Blood Angels is engaged in climbing, trying to kill himself, apparently. Which is probably then the shattered tower from the short story. This is definitely the planet that the Emperor visited, and he definitely found something interesting here. Though it's interesting to see that the Moloch people seem to think that the Stormlord left the planet on a beam of light to go up to his magical seafaring vessel, whereas Horus believes that he came to Moloch on a starship but didn't need one to return. So there's a starship with some conflicting stories about it. Interesting. But let us instead return to the riveting conversation that Raven is currently having with the Scriveners, describing to him the dire shortage of las cells in some random-ass backwards place on his god-awful planet. I say conversation, but it's a pretty one-way street, and Raven is getting rather sick of it as well, as he decides to draw his last pistol and inform the Scrivener that the next bastard who attacks him with numbers or logic is going to get ventilated. Raven may be a douchebag, but he is growing on me. And man, this must be one hell of a chaotic meeting, as apparently everyone is just talking over each other, even as the Scrivener is desperately trying to get Raven to pay attention to the logistical levels. The various adepts and representatives of the Titan Legions are shouting one another down. Certain members of the Legion are of the opinion that the only worthwhile strategy is to simply walk slowly towards the Warmaster Legion and die gloriously. Very well then. Whilst others are in disagreement with this stance. To be fair, the Legion that is advocating collective suicide, is the one who had the rest of their forces wiped out on Mars through treachery, so you can kind of understand why they might be a little bit extra butthurt. The Ultramarines, on the other hand, take certain objection to Raven's energetic and innovative way of leading a meeting. I can identify. I absolutely can. I've sat through my fair share of boring meetings myself. But the Ultramarine says that if Raven doesn't take this seriously, he's going to take his entire legion and screw off back to the 500 worlds. Raven calls his bluff, or at the very least tries to do so, saying that they have been tasked to stay here by the Emperor and the Primarch, and they would never break those vows. And he's probably right, but you never know. It might be a threat worth making, mightn't it? I don't think it'll work, though. Raven's mind is not on logistics. He is, well, kind of in agreement with the Suicidal Titan Legion, really. When the Ultramarine points out that logistic levels, etc., these are the things you need to know to win this war, he simply states that he has an army of Scriveners to take care of this for him. All he needs to know is where he's going to be riding out to battle. Which, to be fair, has been the strategy of his family for the last few thousand years, and it worked out pretty well for everybody else, so why change tactics now, eh? Though, what he doesn't tell everyone is that he's not entirely sure yet who he is going to be riding out to battle with. Apparently, his psychic mother and his wife Lix have been talking to one another, and they have both agreed that Raven is going to play some vital part in the coming war, and he's going to be getting himself quite a lot of fame in doing so, as his knight Banelash has been seen in several visions riding into the enemy hordes, causing all kinds of chaos and mayhem. But Raven doesn't know if his glory is going to be produced by siding with the Imperium or with Horus, and he doesn't really seem to mind particularly much either way. Somebody who does care, although precious little, is Mortarion, however, as we take yet another whiplashy little snap on over to the heretic side of things. You see, Mortarion, despite being wounded, again, is up and about as usual, surrounded by his death shroud. He is wandering off to the apothecarium, not to receive further treatment, but instead because he is feeling a disturbance in the force. Mortarion had spent a lot of time with his second father back on his home world, the monstrous creature that made a habit out of making more monsters out of a combination of flesh and warp craft. So Mortarion recognizes whatever the hell this is, and apparently it's inside of the Gene Vault. He is asked repeatedly to please not enter the Gene Vault because it's kinda valuable, but Mortarion ignores it and goes inside, along with his death shroud and an apothecary, where he senses the presence of a creature. When Mortarion speaks to it, it says that it needs flesh, and so Mortarion kills all 7 members of his death shroud and leaves the apothecary to be eaten alive by the monster. Jesus. Right, well, if we had any doubts about Mortarion being the bad guy, Mortarion is another one of those characters. I remember an early story about him, which talked about how he rebelled against his second father, the monster that dragged him off into the mountains and taught him all kinds of horrible things. Mortarion identified with the human survivors of his homeworld and protected them against the monsters, waging war against them and eventually trying to kill his father before failing and being saved by the Emperor. And now he doesn't give a shit at all about his death shroud? Oh, well, I guess he's grown a little bit more cynical over the years. The creature turns out to be Grulgor, the Death Guard captain killed by Nathaniel Garo as they were escaping the betrayal at Istvan. He had been killed by the Death Eater virus, and so... World Eater virus, and so he says the World Eater virus is what the warp used to rebuild him, as he is now a living, breathing sentient host of the World Eater virus. And he's right in the middle of the Death Guard's gene seed storage. Well, that worked out about as well as you can imagine. All of it destroyed, but for some mysterious reason, Mortarion doesn't seem to care. Like, how many thousands of warriors did you basically lose right there? Just because Mortarion is like, hey, there's a monster in my most precious and valuable of gene seed vaults. Let's make an appearance, see what it is. Mortarion, I swear to God. And whilst the book has got me in a petulant mood, I might as well indulge in one of my favourite little pet peeves with 40k. Void warfare. And how its rules seems to change from book to book to book to book to book. The Sons of Horus are readying their assault upon Moloch. The defenders of the planet have come up with a fairly simplistic strategy, where a small vanguard force of ships will advance towards the incoming Astartes Legion ships and attempt to provoke them into a ill-advised assault upon the main battery lines. Nice bit of underestimation there. Oh, our enemy is a goddamn Primarch. Let's attack him with the most basic strategy in the book. I'm sure he won't have come up with any way of dealing with that. But we'll get to the unfolding catastrophe in all due time. The opening torpedo salvo is launched, and there is a mention made that they will take 95 minutes to reach the Sons of Horus battle lines. 95 minutes. See, that's more along the lines of void warfare as I would view it and see it. Crossing any amount of distance in space takes an absolutely absurd amount of time, even with weapons that don't have to worry about any kind of acceleration or crew tolerances or artificial gravity, and can literally just be ginormous thrusters with a warhead and some guidance mechanisms. It would still take absolutely forever. And yet after this, of course, the battle will be resolved in basically 5 minutes afterwards. I hate that. It's like, oh yes, we have so much armor and our guns have so much range. It's like, oh, it'll take forever to get in range and actually start fighting. And then when the fighting begins, it's over in a goddamn flash, to the point where boarding actions are absolutely devastating and can swing the entire combat just like that. I mean, if engagement ranges here are measured in the hours, surely you'd have a decent amount of time to react to a boarding party, but oh well, details. The defenders of Moloch swiftly get taught that, yeah, no, if the War Master looks like he's just coming at you in an obvious fashion, he probably isn't, as tomb ships, vessels apparently completely powered down and sent flying through the void with 0 life support, 0 energy emissions, 0 power, etc., emerge within the defensive line. And assault ports and boarding torpedoes are already streaking towards his biggest, baddest gun platforms. Moloch is gutted from the inside out as the fleet, trying to keep the Sons of Horus away from the gun platforms, get caught in between the fleet and the platforms, and the whole damn thing is done in the time it takes the War Master to lead a boarding squad from the point of entry to the bridge of the enemy's capital ship. Which, I imagine, would be something like, 15 minutes if he's really taking his time. The whole damned thing is over in less than quarter of an hour, it seems like. There's even one moment where the Grand Admiral of Moloch gets to have a little bit of a reverie where he thinks to himself, oh, I was a stupid little lad, wasn't I? As a half a dozen ships explode in the distance whilst he's thinking this. I get the need for a little bit of dramatic urgency in all of this, but just once I'd like to see an actual space battle where the spaceships can take a little bit of a beating, you know? Oh well. Moving on, the War Master, as mentioned, does indeed board the capital ship. He fights his way through some ultramarines, some mechanicum monstrosities. Upon reaching the bridge, however, he does something rather interesting. The Grand Admiral is fighting the urge to simply just bend the knee and surrender immediately upon seeing this god of war entering his bridge, when Horus says that, "Oh, it would be pointless to resist, mere mortal," which gets the Admiral to reach for his sidearm. This one was quite interesting to me because he actually asks the Widowmaker afterwards, the simple warrior that is part of the Mournival on Abaddon's invitation, why he did that. Because apparently the Widowmaker's like, "Oh, why did you make him attack you there? He would have surrendered if you just shut up, boss." But it turns out Horus wanted him to attack him, so that he could kill him in glorious combat. He could have the Admiral end his life and his career in brilliant, valiant defense of Moloch and of his command, instead of surrendering and rendering all of his efforts up until this point absolutely moot and pointless. His spirited and theoretically solid defense of Moloch would all have been completely null and void, and he would only have been remembered as the coward who gave up. This is a very nice little touch that shows that there's still a little bit of Horus left within the War Master, something that his character desperately needs. I've talked about this previously, but Horus went from a noble leader of men, a man who would seek peace wherever possible, a man who, again, sought to leave the people he conquered better than he found them, an idealist, a thinker, a philosopher. And then, virtually overnight, he turns into a complete bloodthirsty maniac who murders the Remembrancer en masse in front of a little podium where he gets to watch the unfolding bloodshed. And hell, just a couple books ago, he tore Erebus's face from his skull. Not to mention the whole, Lupercal's court and all that. His character didn't so much flip as it flipped, then flipped again, just so it could flip one more time to really hammer home the point. So it's really nice to see a little bit of Horus's old character on display here, particularly as the book is, of course, intended to be all about him. We also get to see a little bit of the Emperor's emergency plan be set into motion here, as well as we're introduced to one character by the name of Olivia, who has apparently been chilling out on this planet for a very long time, and before that, for a very long time as well, as she mentions that she remembered the floods of antiquity, presumably referring to the biblical flood. I guess that means God is real in the 41st millennium. An unexpected side note there, but very well. God exists. Presumably he was, what? Zinch? Nah, he's a little bit too unchanging for that. Korn? Uncharitable. Nurgle? That's a bit far as well. Sinesh? Nah, he doesn't really fit. I guess he was just a minor chaos deity then. Kinda disappointing in a way, but there you are. What is not disappointing, however, is the massed tank assault that comes up just after the introduction to Ophelia, who, well, for now she's just a character that kind of appears and introduces herself basically as Perpetual that has a family that she originally got as a cover for something. And now she's heading towards the planet's capital, Lupercalia. Very mysterious and everything, but more interestingly, the Sons of Horus are launching a huge armored assault upon enemy defensive positions that have established themselves on the other side of a narrow land bridge, as Horus insisted that the army land near the ruined tower that our Blood Angel was climbing earlier on in the story, as this was the beginning of the Fulgurine Path, the apparent path that the Stormlord took when he first arrived on Moloch. This is the beginning of Horus's not obsession just yet, but well, kind of, yes, obsession with the ritual of the thing. This is an inferior strategic position, as the defender of the Moloch army points out that she doesn't understand why a commander as superlative as Horus decided to put down on a tiny isolated landmass, thereby bottlenecking his army and forcing it to charge screaming towards her guns. It's because Horus thinks that there is some real significance to the path that the Emperor took. And to be fair, that's not an awful assumption. If you know that the Emperor, or well, no, quote-unquote, that the Emperor followed a very specific procedure to become a god, or at the very least a god in Horus's eyes, then you probably want to make sure that you do the same thing step by step by step. Because you're dealing with esoterical bullshit now, and you can never quite know what crucial tiny little piece of ritual is absolutely necessary, whilst to you seeming like absolutely nothing. Better to be safe than sorry, I guess, when you're trying to ascend to godhood. The Sons of Horus are going to have to pay the blood geld for this ascension, however, as indeed charging a massive mailed fist over a narrow landmass into dozens of entrenched super heavies and artillery pieces unsurprisingly comes with a cost. Aboard one of the landing crafts approaching Omaha Beach, or the 40k equivalent of such a thing anyways, is Horus Aximand, who has a rather interesting little conversation with another one of the Sons of Horus. He notices that he has a token, an Eye of Horus, that he seems to be kind of like cradling in a religious-esque fashion. And Aximand asks him half-jokingly, "Superstitious are we?" And the man responds, "Well, we are allowed to be now." Good point. Damn good bloody point. And Horus Aximand himself is a little bit like, I mean, yeah, I guess. He had been expecting that after everything that had been going on, after Erebus's abject humiliation, after Horus, how do I put it, kind of elevated himself above the apparent witchcraft and occulty nonsense of Erebus and his coven, he figured that the nature of the 16th Legion might reassert itself. It might return back to the upright honorary standards of the Legion before the corruption began. Except what has actually happened is that it has seemingly degraded to a far more brutal tribalistic state. The Legion hasn't returned to the Legion of old, instead it has reversed to a state of Chthonian ganghood. Chthonian. Either way, the home world that Horus grew up on was a very, very vicious and brutal society, ruled over by nasty gangs. These also functioned as essentially kind of tribes in a way, in that they had their own markings, their own territories, their own little iconography that they would tattoo onto their skin, carve into armor and weaponry and so on. And this is now a trend that has been spreading throughout the Legion, on behest of Taragost, you know, the guy who had his throat slit. Turns out he survived that, which made the entire thing a little pointless. It was kind of cool seeing Tariq Torgarden, or, you know, what pretends to be him, emerge and be like, okay, you didn't kill enough people, I'm gonna kill you now. Except I guess Space Marines get a special pass and get to live after being sacrificed to the Chaos Gods. Rightio then. That raises some interesting occult questions, doesn't it? If you don't actually have to kill them, couldn't you just have like a stable of permanently reusable sacrifices? Yeah, you bleed them a little bit, then you take them off, let them recover, and then you reuse them. Surely that would be a far more eco-friendly form of demon worship, right? I suppose you could argue that economy of action and the environment is not at the top of the budding demomancer's list of priorities, yet nevertheless, I feel it worth mentioning. But for all of the apparent degradation amongst the ranks, Horus's strategic genius is yet to give way completely, as he orders a deep strike right on top of the Imperial Command headquarters. I presume they found it via, I don't know, orbital surveillance? Monitoring the radio traffic? You would think the Imperials would try to hide that, but maybe they can't. It just seems a little bit silly to be like, oh yes, our headquarters is here, by the way. Then again, maybe they figured that the Sons of Horus wouldn't be crazy enough to drop down right on top of it. Yeah, would the Legion, renowned for shock assaults, do something like that? Don't be silly. Grail Noctua is leading the assault, and he smashes apart the Central Command Center with contemptuous ease, hammering right through the goddamn concrete roof. Well, there you go. He's also apparently specially modified his jump pack to scream as it descends. Personally, I don't know how you make a pair of giant jet engines not scream, but hey, again, minor insignificant details indeed. He manages to get wounded whilst doing this, a piece of rebar through his thigh, and he quite enjoys it. Now, this is pleasant. I haven't been wounded in a while. This is kind of cool. And so he looks down at the wounded Imperial commander, the officer in charge, lying wounded and dying on the ground, holding a pistol. An ornate las pistol, he thinks at least. And so, enjoying the sensation, he spreads his arms out wide and says, "Give it your best shot." I love this scene too. God, this book is full of really cool little scenes that would be, oh god, I want to say excellent in a movie format, but let's not ask for that anymore. I remember a more innocent time when I was like, we'll get to see a Horus TV series and it'll be great. Yeah, I'm not there anymore. Oh god, shield us from the mainstream. Anywho, the officer then lifts up a Volkite pistol and says, "Thank you," and shoots him through the heart. Fortunately for Grail Noctua, Space Marines of course have 2 of those. He's not the only one that's going to have a brush with death, however. Even Horus is just about to go down during this engagement, as Raven of House Divine has marched himself and a fair number of his knights towards the battlefield. Not reacting on any actual military intelligence or a summon from the field commander or anything like that, he was told a vision by his wife Lix, who, alongside his mother, are apparently some sort of precog, although, well, kind of and kinda not. They're precogs, but not in the more scientific sense of psychers. They're more heretic precogs? Is there a difference that I started to think about it? Kind of, yes. Their precognitions are messages. It is not something they look for specifically. It is something that comes upon them. In this case, Lix arrives in Raven's bedchamber with her eyes apparently being milky white. This being a sign that they've either gone completely cray-cray, or they are indeed receiving some sort of vision. And the vision was that Horus would apparently be at this particular spot. And the wolf's throat will bare when the twin wolves of fire appear. Cryptic nonsense, but it turns out to be true, as Horus's customized Land Raider has a flare shield, which dissipates the energy of a major anti-tank blast across its hull, setting 2 banners with snarling wolf's head ablaze. Well, there we go then. The Wolves of Fire. And while Horus's personalized Land Raider was more than able to defeat the weapons of pretty much anything on the beach shooting at it, it wasn't good enough to stop the concerted assault of 10 knights bearing down upon it. With his transport destroyed and the War Master exposed, he was just about to go belly up as Raven Divine fired up all of his weapons and unloaded them on the War Master, when the plot intervenes. Malaghurst and Targos had been very, very, very busy indeed, creating half-human, half-demon monstrosity, the Brothers of the Wolf, who now swarm over Horus and decide to just kind of casually stop the laws of physics for a little bit, open a rent into the warp into which all of the firepower of the Knights go, and voila, Horus is fine, then charges the Knights and beat them all to death. Well, to be fair, he only beats a couple of them to death, before the rest retreat, seeing Horus's bodyguard approaching and fearing for their own lives. Which seems a little silly, or actually, well, maybe kinda not. Raven is an incredibly selfish individual, and even though he could probably kill Horus if he just pushed a little bit harder, he'd probably die in the doing of it, and, well, what's the point of becoming the savior of Moloch, a living legend, if you have to die to do it? Somewhat defeats the point, really. And so the War Master gets to live yet another day and commit yet another war crime, as he orders all of his Titan war engines to bombard the ever-living nonsense out of a nearby town, for no other reason than because the fireworks would look pretty. Hey, remember that whole "it's nice to see a speck of the once noble Horus again"? And I've talked about this before. I entirely agree with the idea that the only good war is a quick war, and the only quick war is a brutal war. I get it. Terror as a weapon has been used by human warlords through time immemorial. It's an effective thing. Make an example of something, and hopefully the next guy will surrender without fighting, thereby saving a lot of unnecessary bloodshed. It was what was at the heart of Konrad Kurz's terror tactics, the idea that a lot of blood could be saved if he made his enemies so goddamn scared they were simply unwilling to fight him. There is absolutely a certain logic to that, and again, Horus is a master of the quick, brutal campaign, but there is absolutely a difference between waging a brutal and effective war and just randomly bombing villagers 'cause adorable lights in the sky. This again is the problem with Horus. For every moment that harkens back to the character we were originally introduced to over the course of the first 3 novels, you've got just an absolutely absurdly random act of wanton murder for no particular reason. I get that he's getting corrupted by chaos and all, but it's supposed to be a little bit more of a gradual corruption. Maybe he starts out by executing some people, yet now he's just executing people willy-nilly. The the Land Raider he was riding in, for example, the one that got knocked out, apparently the Mechanicus had guaranteed that it would never fail, that it would be proof against all but a Titan's weaponry. Well, that had proven to be incorrect, since it had been busted open by 10 knights. And so Horus executes a bunch of them just to teach them a lesson. It really is just so stereotypically villainous, isn't it? Like, it's Transformers level of cartoon villainy, where Megatron just randomly shoots someone because, well, you were a bit of a silly willy, weren't you? Speaking of silly willies, on the other side of the planet is Mortarion, carrying out a Blitzkrieg-style assault via drop pod on the planet's largest promethium refinery, and also based to a massive armored formation, which Pesarabo takes care of quite easily because, well, tanks are all well and good, but when Legionnaires are literally on top of you with anti-tank and melter weapons before you can even leave the rallying grounds, yeah, that didn't work out all too well, frankly, for the planet's defenders there. Mortarion even takes a battle cannon shell to the chest and pretty much just, shrugs it off, because Mortarion. This is not an act of complete wanton random ass destruction, however. He has been ordered by Horus to launch a hammer and anvil assault. Mortarion is going to head through the jungle, 9,000 kilometers of jungle, overrun the Preceptor line, and approach the enemy's main defenses from a different direction. I mean, I feel like they could have just done that via mass drop pod landing, but this is cooler, and it does destroy a major source of enemy reinforcements, though I raise one question. If the 9,000 kilometers of jungle is such an incredibly impassable terrain feature that the Death Guard has to employ a rather unique tactic to get through it, how the hell were these reinforcements a threat anyways? Were they going to load onto boats or something and be shipped over via the sea? Considering the traitors had complete dominance in the void, that doesn't seem like anything short of suicide, frankly, but oh well, minor strategic details. We shouldn't question GW's writers too much. Oh, this is a recurring little pet peeve I have with the Black Library writers. They can do some bloody amazing action scenes, but not a one of them has the faintest bloody clue about how a war is fought. That aside, the Death Guard's somewhat novel approach to clearing the forest is by deploying Grolgor, the man who is now the living Death Eater virus. World Eater virus, there you go. To simply just eat the entire bloody forest. Or at the very least, a ridiculously wide path down which the 10,000 Death Guard legionnaires and all of their armor will simply march. As much as I criticize them for not understanding basic concepts of warfare, that is a really creative and awesome way to get past the jungle, and it is Death Guard to the core, so kudos for that. Another nice little satisfying moment, although, again, this is a nice little trap right here. Remember Raven Divine's brother in the tower being tormented by his mother and sister and all of that? And they go to him just to poke and prod at him and mock him, basically, keeping him alive for no other reason than to continue his suffering. Well, he's about to have himself a little bit of a revenge arc. Albard Divine, his stepmother, his whore mother, as he calls her, comes to take some blood from him, because apparently only his blood will work in the rejuvification process that he relies upon to, well, stay alive at this point. As a Snake Lodge, the heretics clearly, are using his blood in some kind of obscene ritual to restore her. But she gets a little bit too close. She is mocked by Albard, and she figures might as well hurt him a little bit. Only too late realizing that Albard has got his hands on a scalpel that Lix apparently left behind after a little torture session. Man, this is a charming family, I tell you what. It makes me feel like we should have had a whole book series about these guys, because they are monstrous little assholes. But finally, Albard gets to be the one with the sphincter in hand, as he grabs a hold of his mother's arm, which apparently her skin is so artificial it cracks and sloughs off just by him gripping it. Oh, goodness. Right, okay then, and he kills her. Now, you might be thinking, alright, so he kills the mother, but he's still a prisoner in a prison tower, surrounded, presumably, by the loyalists of his brother, mother, and sister wife. So, how far is he really going to get with this? Well, he yells for the Sacrosanct. Now, the Sacrosancts are the knockoff Mechanicus of Moloch, basically. They used to be the old order that kept the knights ticking and going, and that was why they were valuable and tolerated as a de facto cult, essentially. But with the Mechanicus arriving, their role has been almost entirely supplanted, to the point that now it seems as if most of their position is actually more or less reliant on the patronage of House Divine, as the Mechanicus could probably move in at any point and take over maintenance of the Knights, but of course doing so would put the maintenance in the hands of the Mechanicus, a far more powerful entity than House Divine. And so the House obviously figures that, alright, these guys aren't quite as good at what they do, but we have absolute authority over them. And so we're going to do our level best to keep them in power. He also calls for the Dawn Guard, 2 guards who are standing outside the door, and when they enter they seem relieved, which informs Albert that he still has loyal supporters amongst the military. He orders them to kill the Saxons, and they do so without any further questions. Apparently, Raven hasn't made all that many friends, and considering his father conveniently died whilst alone with Raven, yeah, I can imagine why the military might not be entirely loyal to him here. What is interesting, though, is that Albard sees things, like he has hallucinations. He thinks that his mother's corpse lying at his feet for a moment looks like a dead Malahagra. He also he thinks that the 2 Dawn Guard look like knights. Knights as in the war machines rather than a mere pair of soldiers. Now to begin with, this completely flew right under my radar, because I'm like, okay, it's a little weird, but this is kind of his house's heritage. They are supposed to be hunting the Malahagras, they view the knights as an important part of their being, and this guy did get half of his brain fried out trying to bond with a knight. And he's been cooped up in a tower for God only knows how many decades, getting constantly tortured. It wouldn't be much of a surprise if his mind was a little breaky at this point. Yet, it'll feed into a, again, genuinely excellent little twist later on. See, again, as much as I do complain about GW's writers on occasion, they do put out some really good stuff on occasion, and hell, I can't write with a damn, so that's certainly something. And continuing the family drama, Raven Divine, now recently bereft of 3 of his beloved sons, is having a little bit of a meltdown. Unsurprisingly, considering the situation. He tries to strangle his wife Lix to death, but as she has a knife at his groin, he thinks the better of it, at least for the immediate future. And Lix informs him that all is not lost. In fact, everything is better than they have ever been. All Raven needs to do is throw himself on the mercy of the gods, or in this case specifically, the White Naga. Ah yes, the serpent cult again. I'm sure that'll work out just fine. Raven needs to get aboard Banalash, It's a knight. That doesn't work either. Never mind, details. Lix has seen Banalash wading into battle, surrounded by gunfire and weapons, and yet seemingly involatile to all of them, whilst laying low the greatest god of war on the battlefield. All of which will come true, incidentally. And all Raven has to do is go out into the forest, aboard his mighty knight, and seek out the White Naga. Or, more correctly, the White Naga will find him. And once it does, glory will be his. And so off goes Raven. Another somewhat ill-advised decision. You might think that the first time the visions of his sister wife basically sent him close to death and got 3 of his sons killed, that he might have a hint more skepticism towards new visions, but nope. Straight on ahead he goes. He almost deserves his fate, now that I come to think of it. We also pop on over to Horus, who is about to get killed for the 3rd time in this book. Holy hell. This time by a psychic imprint of the Emperor, apparently. Horus has gone to a cave where he believes that he was when he visited Moloch the first time around, and it is layered with some kind of psychic defenses that tries to convince anyone and everyone that steps inside that there is a monstrous beast resting in its depths, and that even a being as mighty as Horus would surely fall prey to its vicious claws and talons. That is a really cool defensive measure, by the way. I mean, if you are a psyker and you can mess around with people's mind, surely the best way to ensure nobody comes screwing around with your secrets is to make them feel as if they'll die doing it. That's a pretty damn good idea, isn't it? A vision of the Emperor? An angel of fire, you know. A golden emperor-like thingity-bob made of psychic bullshit appears and starts beating the shit out of everyone. Abaddon, Horus, the whole Mournival, all of them. Even killing a bunch of Justerians, yet just like the Fire Raptors to begin with, and the massive battle just before this, it leaves all of the important characters with a few nice little scratches, a few good scars here and there, and Abaddon with a deep, gravelly voice, but no actually serious injuries. Normally, I would be criticizing the book at this point for pulling the same goddamn trick 3 times, but honestly, the action is so well written here, and it actually feels as if they might really be in danger, that I'm gonna give it another pass on this. I know, I'm being remarkably generous today, aren't I? From the encounter, Horus gets some new theories up and running in that little squirrely brain of his. He figures that the Emperor placed this here as a defensive measure, a way to protect the power that he had stolen from the gods. He muses aloud to his Mournival that humanity apparently came to be because of a random accident, biological nonsense in the soup of old Earth, etc. But he and his brothers had been crafted, not from natural biological materials or any sort of happenstance, but instead via the power of the Immaterium and the incredible mind of the Emperor. The Emperor, Horus said, had gone to the gods and had treated with them, had made promises to them in return for their knowledge, in return for their abilities. And with that knowledge, the Emperor had crafted the Primarchs and the Legions and started his conquest of the galaxy. And in turn, he had hidden this truth from everyone. He condemned the warp utterly, not because the warp is evil or corrupts everything. Horus, God. You know, it kind of annoys me again, because just seconds ago, we were talking about... minutes ago, we were talking about Horus burning down an entire city and randomly executing tech priests because they didn't give him the kind of warranty he wanted. Like, oh, the warp isn't evil, it's not a problem. What? Kill civilians by the truckload? Go ahead, Abaddon, have fun. Anywho, the Emperor is doing all of this because he's afraid that somebody else might realize the power that he held and might try to copy it to fight against him. Now, to a certain extent, I do believe there is at the very least a kind of truth to this, in that the Emperor probably did contact the gods in some way, though I don't... The problem here is that the new lore has complicated this even more. Like a couple of years ago, I would say that, oh yeah, no, definitely. The Emperor did make some kind of treaty with the gods, he gained some sort of knowledge to create the Primarchs, all the while planning to backstab them. A noble act, mind you, in my opinion. But with the new lore, we've been told that the Emperor didn't invent the Astartes at all. Apparently it was a bunch of rando-ass human scientists that did most of the work. And then, of course, you've got Belisarius Cawl, who manages to not only copy, but improve upon the Emperor's work. And he didn't have access to any warp magic the last time I checked, so... It's gotten a hell of a lot more complicated because, well, the worst part of it too is, in the Call book, they specifically mention that the guy who, figured out the genetical formula for the Astartes was a man by the name of Astartes. And so they named them after him, apparently. Right, so they're no... Horus is wrong, then, I guess? They're no longer actually demigod entities. They're merely just biology. Because, again, the Astartes are the DNA, the physical template of the Primarchs, shall we say, forced upon the human form. So... Is there no space magic? Is there space magic? What, if anything, did the Emperor do on Moloch here, then? This is the problem when you try to radically change everything to justify your introduction of a ridiculous character to make Space Marines 2.0. Anywho, we'll wrap up part 2 here, and hopefully we'll make do with part 3. Until then, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.